You are walking through the cold, echoing corridors of a Tudor palace. Candlelight flickers against stone walls, casting the painted faces of kings in long shadows, stern, unyielding, watching you from centuries past. But then, beneath the silence of power, you hear something else. A fragile cry, faint and trembling, seeping from behind a small wooden door hidden in the corner. No guards, no coat of arms, no crown, only a cradle, and inside it, a child. A child born of a king's blood, yet destined never to be called a prince. In that moment you realize official history records only the heirs who were acknowledged. But the forgotten ones, the children cast into shadow, were the very forces that bent thrones, reshaped dynasties, and altered the fate of empires. They tried to bury these children in silence. Their names erased their portraits, hidden their voices, cut out of the royal chronicles. But blood leaves traces that no parchment can destroy. What if I told you that some of these forgotten heirs carried stronger claims to the throne than the kings and queens who wore the crown? That secret alliances, concealed marriages, and unacknowledged bloodlines have haunted the monarchy for centuries, and that if revealed, they could have rewritten the very history of royal succession. This is not just another tale of scandal. It is the revelation of how illegitimate heirs' children, the world was never meant to remember, changed the course of kingdoms. And tonight, you are going to follow their shadows. The year is 1519. The Tudor court glitters with power and anxiety. King Henry VIII, desperate for a male heir, finally cradles a newborn son. But this child is not born of his queen. He comes into the world through Elizabeth Blount, the king's mistress. He is christened Henry FitzRoy, literally son of the king. Unlike other illegitimate children, FitzRoy is not hidden. The king parades him before nobles, grants him the titles of Duke of Richmond, and Somerset showers him with privileges almost equal to a prince. For a moment, it seems that this boy might stand where no illegitimate child ever had on the threshold of kingship itself. But fate is merciless. FitzRoy dies young, barely into manhood, and with him dies the hope of an acknowledged but unofficial heir. Or so the records say. For though his line was thought to have ended, whispers suggest his blood seeped quietly into noble houses, joining marriages that would eventually touch the Spencer family centuries later, binding itself once more to the crown. One child erased from the throne, but whose shadow lingered in ways no one could control. Travel further back in time to the late 14th century. John of Gaunt, one of the mightiest princes of medieval Europe, walks hand in hand with his mistress, Catherine Swynford. From their forbidden love come 4 children, branded bastards denied inheritance, excluded from the great game of succession. But destiny bends. Years later, John weds Catherine, and their children are legitimized by royal decree. Parliament wary of their blood rules that they may hold land, but never the throne. Yet, history has a way of breaking its own rules. Generations later, one of their descendants, a woman of indomitable will named Margaret Beaufort, would use that tainted line to raise her son, Henry Tudor, to the crown. The dynasty that produced Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, that shaped England's religion, politics, and culture, was founded upon children once declared unfit to rule. What law had forbidden blood insisted upon. And then, in the 17th century, another monarch turned shadows into legacies. Charles II, the so-called Merry Monarch, fathered no legitimate children with his queen. Yet outside the marriage bed, he sired more than a dozen. Unlike most kings, Charles did not hide them away. He gave them names, lands, titles. From his hand arose dukedoms, the Dukes of Richmond, Grafton, St. Albans.
Your Grace.
Noble lines that flourish even now. Today, nearly a quarter of Britain's great dukedoms trace their blood back, not to the Queen's womb, but to the King's mistresses. The official Stuart line withered in exile, but the illegitimate branches thrived, their descendants still shaping the aristocracy of Britain. The dynasty failed in law, but multiplied in blood. Step back, and the pattern becomes clear. A boy who was almost a prince, erased by death, but whose veins carried dynastic possibility. A family of bastards turned into the foundation of an entire royal house. A court overflowing with children who should have been forgotten, but instead became the backbone of the nobility. Again and again history hides them, and again they return to alter its course. They do not sit upon thrones, Yet they bend the world around them. They are the unacknowledged architects of kingdoms. And so a question lingers, one that history itself cannot silence. If illegitimate children could reshape the fate of England, how many more lie buried in the margins of dusty archives, their blood still flowing through veins that move unseen among us? What secrets remain locked in genealogies, in forgotten crypts, in sealed archives, marked never to be opened, because what we have uncovered so far is only the beginning. These were not isolated accidents of passion or chance. They were threads in a vast hidden web of power, an unspoken strategy that stretched across courts and centuries. And as we follow that web into darker alleys of history, the revelations become stranger, more unsettling, and infinitely more dangerous. But the shadows grow darker the deeper you look. For what appears at first to be isolated scandals, royal mistakes, whispered affairs, children hidden behind convent walls, begins to reveal itself as something far more deliberate. A pattern of secrecy, of control of dynasties, shaped not only by law, but by the blow. Consider Scotland. In the 16th century, James V fathered a son with his mistress, Lady Margaret Erskine. The boy was named James Stuart, the Earl of Moray. History might have cast him aside as it did so many others, but instead he rose to become Regent of Scotland. It was this illegitimate son who stood against his own half-sister, Mary, Queen of Scots. He orchestrated her downfall, forcing her abdication, and placed her infant son on the throne as James VI. Think about the irony. A child, who should have been erased by history instead, became the architect of a queen's ruin, shifting the line of succession for a kingdom. One illegitimate heir rewrote the fate of Scotland, and by extension, the fate of England, for it was James VI who would inherit the English crown, uniting the two realms. Now look to the chaos of 15th century England, to a woman named Eleanor Butler. Whispers say she was secretly married to Edward IV before he wed Elizabeth Woodville. If true, that secret contract would have made every child of Edward's official marriage illegitimate, invalidating their claims to the throne. This single, hidden union became the weapon Richard III used to justify seizing power, declaring the princes in the Tower unfit to inherit. The Wars of the Roses. The bloody collapse of one dynasty and the rise of another were fueled by a question of legitimacy, by a union hushed into silence by the possibility that entire branches of royalty were children who should not have existed in the eyes of the law. A forgotten vow, a hidden heir, and England drowned in blood to settle the score. And the pattern does not stop with England or Scotland. In France, the Bourbon line rose on the back of whispers that some of its scions were born out of wedlock, their claims preserved not through law, but through force and cunning. In Spain, illegitimate children of noblemen found themselves wielding power in colonial administrations, their blood opening doors, even as their names were struck from official records. Across Europe, shadows walked beside thrones, and sometimes it was those shadows who held the real power. By now, you see, the design illegitimate children are not accidents. They are instruments. They appear when dynasties grow weak, when alliances fracture, when the careful breeding of thrones produces too much fragility. From the margins, these children carried vigor, independence, a ruthlessness born of being denied. They were sharper, hungrier, more willing to seize what the legitimate heirs took for granted. And rulers, whether they admitted it or not, used them. Kings acknowledged certain bastards not out of affection, but out of strategy, granting them titles, sending them into marriages that bound noble houses, weaving their blood into the very structure of power. The illegitimate heir became a tool, a weapon, a safeguard against extinction. But this strategy came at a price. For once, a royal court begins to cultivate illegitimate lines, to track them, to preserve them. Those bloodlines do not simply fade. They linger, they spread, they multiply in silence, building networks of influence far outside the king's reach. By the 17th century, entire noble houses in Britain owed their existence not to queens and kings, but to royal mistresses and children once hidden. Charles II may not have left a single legitimate heir, but his bastards became the nobility itself. They were the empire's dukes, its generals, its courtiers. The official line was fragile. The shadow line was indestructible. Step back now and imagine what this means. Every time a crown passed from one head to another, every time a dynasty rose or fell, hidden blood was shaping the outcome. Wars of succession treaties, marriages, even revolutions behind them. All the question of legitimacy was never as clear as history books pretend. For every name written in gold in the chronicles, there were others written in invisible ink, children buried in silence, yet moving history from below. And if that is true, if these illegitimate heirs were not accidents, but deliberate threads in a web of power, then what does it say about the nature of monarchy itself? Was it ever truly about divine right, about law, about legitimacy? Or was it always about blood, hidden, preserved, manipulated, waiting for its chance to surface again? The more you follow this trail, the more unsettling it becomes. Because the secrecy was systematic, court physicians recorded traits, archivists sealed away contracts, monasteries kept registers of births no one was meant to read. The machinery of monarchy was not just crowns and ceremonies, it was record-keeping, selective forgetting, calculated breeding in the shadows. The royal family was not only a dynasty, it was a laboratory, and that laboratory never truly closed. Even in modern times, genealogists working in secret compiled charts of aristocratic women, ranking them by bloodlines, searching for the most valuable heritage to bring into the crown. Even Diana, centuries later, was not chosen by chance. She was the culmination of centuries of hidden strategy. Spencer bloodline absorbing illegitimate heirs, preserving what official history denied. When she married Charles, it was not just romance, it was the return of those forgotten children, their blood carried once more to the throne. This is the escalation of the story, the realization that forgotten royal children were not only historical curiosities. They were the hidden gears that turned the machine of empire. And if that is true, then we are forced to ask, how many more are still hidden, their descendants living unnoticed, their veins carrying the same blood that once toppled queens and raised kings? The answers may lie not only in old chronicles, but in the science of our own age. Because when we turn from archives to genetics, when we match forgotten names to living blood, the shadows of illegitimate heirs grow even closer, more intimate, and infinitely more disturbing. And now the shadows meet the science. For centuries, these stories of illegitimate heirs lingered in whispers, in half-burned documents, and faded genealogies. But today, in the age of DNA secrets, once meant to die in convents and crypts, are beginning to speak again. Take the bones unearthed in forgotten chapels, the fragments of hair preserved in reliquaries, the sealed coffins hidden beneath cathedral floors. When modern researchers test them, when strands of ancient DNA are compared against the living, unsettling patterns emerge. Traits, once dismissed as rumor height, eye color, facial structure, begin to align across centuries. You look into the portrait of a medieval king, and then into the photograph of a modern nobleman, and you realize the same blood still flows quietly, invisibly carrying forward what the law tried to erase. Genealogists speak of convergent inheritance, where multiple hidden lines descend from the same ancestor and then rejoin centuries later. In practice, this means a single modern figure may carry more authentic genetic material from a dynasty than the official monarchs who ruled under its name. Illegitimate branches, spreading wide and unchecked, sometimes preserve the vitality that narrow legal marriages lost. In the shadows, the blood stayed strong. And then there are the archives, locked drawers in palaces' files, marked never to be opened. Reports commissioned not for the public, but for those who needed to know. Records of royal mistresses, baptismal certificates altered or destroyed, contracts hinting at secret marriages annulled before they were ever acknowledged. Even in the 20th century, palace genealogists compiled charts of eligible brides, rating them not only by wealth or status, but by ancestral purity, by how much forgotten royal blood they carried in their veins. Some of those charts, quietly declassified decades later, suggest that modern unions were not chance at all, but the continuation of a centuries-long experiment in bloodline preservation. The more you look, the more the line between history and eugenics begins to blur. Court physicians in the Renaissance measured skull shapes, recorded eye
This
colors,
is exactly what I was
documented
looking
temperaments
for.
not for curiosity, but to identify which children carried the strongest ancestral traits. Certain illegitimate lines were prized for their vigor, their independence, their ability to thrive outside the suffocating rituals of court life. Others were watched with suspicion, feared for their ambition, or their resemblance to rulers best forgotten. It was not only politics, it was a primitive form of selective breeding hidden behind gilded curtains. And science today only sharpens the unease. Geneticists who have compared modern samples with remains from Tudor Plantagenet and Stuart burials whisper that matches exist, markers of kinship that should not be there if official genealogies were true. They talk of sequences carried by individuals who should have no connection to extinct dynasties, and yet do. It suggests that the illegitimate heirs did not vanish. They carried the line forward, branching into aristocratic families, eventually merging back into the royal web in ways no law could predict. What does this mean? It means that the crown we see today is not just the result of legitimate succession of treaties and coronations. It is the convergence of countless hidden veins, all meeting in the present, all alive in the bodies of those who still carry titles, and perhaps even in those who walk unnoticed among us. The barrier between history and the present dissolves when blood itself becomes the record. And here is the most disquieting thought of all. If archives reveal only fragments, and if genetics exposes what was meant to stay buried, then we may not yet know the full reach of these hidden heirs. Their descendants may sit in parliaments, in boardrooms, even in palaces unaware, or perhaps very aware of the power they inherit. History was supposed to erase them. Science is beginning to restore them. And with every test tube, with every match, the forgotten royal children return, whispering that legitimacy was never the truth. Blood was. But if blood is memory, if blood is destiny, then what do these forgotten heirs truly symbolize? Are they evidence of a monarchy built on shadows, or proof that power cannot be contained by law? To understand that we must step away from science and look deeper into the realm of symbols, myths, and the philosophy of kingship itself. Blood is not only biology. In every age, in every culture, blood has been the deepest symbol of power. To be royal was not simply to wear a crown. It was to embody a lineage, to carry within your veins the invisible thread that tied the present to the ancient past. That is why illegitimate heirs were so dangerous. They carried the same sacred blood, but outside the control of law. They were living proof that, think of the cradle in the shadowed chamber. The child inside is denied a name, denied a crown, yet the symbolism is undeniable. The kingdom pretends he does not exist, but the truth lies in his veins. He is both everything and nothing, legally erased, yet genetically eternal. He becomes the embodiment of a paradox authority hidden in silence, sovereignty, that cannot be spoken legitimacy without recognition. In this way, the illegitimate heir is not just a child, he is a symbol of suppressed truth itself. The crown, in contrast, is an artifact of performance. It shines in public ceremonies legitimized by parchment and church, yet its power depends on obedience, not inheritance. When the two collide, when the hidden blood of the forgotten child rises against the fragile authority of a crown, the myth of monarchy cracks. What remains is a question that still haunts us. Is sovereignty written on paper, or is it written in blood? Across time, other cultures carried the same tension. In Japan, emperors claimed descent from the sun goddess, yet countless concubines birthed children who complicated the line. In Egypt, the pharaoh was divine, but rival sons, born in shadows, often became warriors and usurpers. In medieval Europe, popes declared which marriages counted, but the people whispered of bastards who looked too much like their kings. Always the same pattern: law seeks to control, blood refuses to obey. And perhaps this is why these forgotten children attract our imagination. They are not just historical curiosities. They are archetypes. They symbolize the memory that power tries to erase, the truth that refuses to die. Every illegitimate heir is a reminder that monarchy is never as pure as it pretends, that every dynasty hides fractures in its foundation. They are living contradictions, shadows that prove the light is false. Philosophers once argued that kings ruled by divine right, that their authority flowed from God to crown to subject. But the existence of illegitimate heirs undermines that theology. If bloodlines wander, if crowns can be claimed by those the law denies, then divinity itself is suspect. Perhaps kingship was never divine, but human, messy, passionate, uncontrolled. Perhaps monarchy, at its core, is not a system of sacred order, but of carefully managed chaos. And those children denied by law are the chaos personified. Look again at their stories, and you see more than politics. You see metaphors. Henry FitzRoy, the almost prince symbol of opportunity, lost a ghost of what might have been. The Beaufort line bastards turned dynasty proof that the illegitimate can become the foundation of legitimacy itself. The children of Charles II, living emblems of pleasure and power illegality, transformed into aristocracy. James Stuart, the bastard regent, proof that authority does not come from law, but from will. Each one is an icon of something deeper than history. They are reminders that truth is rarely where law says it is. And here lies the final paradox. The more history tried to erase them, the stronger their symbolic power became. Erasure transformed them into myths, into whispered legends, into archetypes that carried meaning long after their names were struck from the rolls of succession. In their silence, they became louder than any crowned king. So what do they mean for us today? Perhaps that power, real power, does not reside in crowns or parliaments, in constitutions or coronations. It resides in the human need to believe in blood, in heritage, in the stories we tell about who truly deserves to rule. The forgotten royal children remind us that legitimacy is never absolute, never secure. It is always contested, always fragile, always haunted by shadows, at the edge of the throne. And this is where the story turns once more. Because if these children are not only figures of history, but symbols of hidden truth, then the question remains, what does their existence demand of us? And what unfinished story do they leave hanging over the throne today? So perhaps Darkling, the story of forgotten royal children, was never about scandal at all. Perhaps it was the oldest reminder that every throne is built on shadows. Every crown haunted by bloodlines, erased but never destroyed. The kings and queens we remember are only half the story. The other half lies in children whose names were struck from the records, yet whose veins carried the same fire. They were the ghosts who shaped dynasties from behind the curtain, the hidden architects of history. And now you must ask yourself, if this is what has already been uncovered, if bastards could topple queens, create dynasties, and fill entire noble houses, then what remains hidden still? How many lines of descent still coil invisibly through Europe, through the Americas, through the world? How many living heirs walk among us, unaware that their ancestors once shook thrones, or perhaps all too aware? The truth is unfinished. The archives are not fully opened. The DNA has not all been tested. The story is still writing itself. And one day, a discovery, one forgotten child, one sealed document, one genetic match could change everything we think we know about royal history, and perhaps even about who truly deserves to rule. If you have felt the weight of these shadows tonight, if you believe that history is never as clean as the chronicles claim, then join us. Subscribe and walk further into the labyrinth of forgotten bloodlines. And tell me, where are you listening from? Because across continents, across centuries, we are all bound by these whispers of hidden heritage, waiting for the day when the past finally forces itself back into the present. The forgotten royal children were never meant to be remembered, but they are not gone. They are waiting.